It's recording. Hello and welcome to Nevada State College's Spring 2021 Psychology Panel. I am your moderator, Noelle Garcia, the Internship Manager in the Career Services Center. I would like to begin by thanking our 4 panelists and the psychology faculty for supporting this event. Now let's get started. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, stating their name, their business title, the organization in which they work for, degrees they hold, and from which institutions. So if we could start with Christina.
Sure. My name is Christina Kettner. I have a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology with a minor in Forensic Science from Cal State Long Beach. I am currently the Clinic Service Representative at BoysTown, Nevada's Behavioral Health Clinic.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby Ortega. I have a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and minor in Communications from Nevada State College. I also have a Master's in Public Administration from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, so UNLV. And I work right now with Fullfillment Fund Las Vegas, which is a nonprofit organization for college access for students. And I think that's it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brie Mercadante. I have a Bachelor's in Science in Psychology from Nevada State College, and I am currently getting my Master's in Social Work from Columbia University. I am currently the Program Director at Center for Behavioral Health, which is a substance abuse treatment facility.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Dave Green. I have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in German from the University of Utah. I have a Bachelor or a Master's of Arts in Psychology and a PhD in Clinical Psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology. I'm currently the Mental Health Director for the Nevada Department of Corrections.
Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you introducing yourselves. We have a total of 6 questions, and I'll just go through them and we'll respond in the same order. So with the first question, it is a 2-part one, and of course, feel free to ask me to repeat it if you would like me to. It is, was it difficult to get into your position? And did you have to earn a master's or a PhD in order to achieve your career goals?
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So my current position at BoysTown did not require a degree. Having a degree in psychology was definitely a plus, though, being at a behavioral health clinic. So I immediately, to my prospective employer, was seen as someone who would have familiarity with some of the diagnostic terminology I'd run into on a day-to-day basis, as well as having gained experience with HIPAA compliance, ethics, and just a general understanding of how the mind works. So I could work with people of various backgrounds, no problem. Once I got into this position, I started looking into a little bit more of what the organization was about, and saw that more and more my background was reflected within other people that I work alongside. So 3 psychologists here licensed and practicing, as well as other people in the social services side of the community. I wouldn't say that it was overly difficult to get into this position, but it definitely helped having a background in psychology, because that put me ahead of other candidates who might have only worked in customer service. That's kind of it as far as this position is concerned, but I would like to touch very briefly on another position I had immediately before this. That was something that did require a degree. I was a residential care technician with a post-acute care facility who worked with brain and spinal cord patients. So that definitely was an alternative route that required a degree and led me to be able to work with patients directly under the guidance of licensed professionals like speech therapists, occupational therapists, someone doing cognitive behavioral therapy. So just another quick example of another position I've had that did require a degree.
Thank you for sharing. Ruby, next.
Yeah. So my current role, I forgot to mention, I'm a post-secondary manager for Fulfillment Fund Las Vegas. In my current role, there was a requirement of at least a bachelor's degree. They actually found out that I was in the program when they hired me, and that was a benefit to the role because I was already learning about development of departments and budgeting and all that good stuff through the business or through the administration, public administration. And so they saw that as a benefit. I was hired 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And so it was just a bachelor's that was needed. But again, adding that master's degree really helped me develop that department that we now have. Similar to Christina, when I graduated from my bachelor's degree from Nevada State College, I also needed a bachelor's degree to be, and I think I'm going to touch briefly on that. I needed a bachelor's degree to be a recruiter, which I was a recruiter for Nevada State College. So, I mean, yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Bree?
No, it wasn't too difficult. I started off as a counselor, a substance abuse counselor. It wasn't that hard to get into this position just because it is such a high turnover rate. Treating substance abuse is a very difficult field to be in. It's a very raw field. So we tend to get a very high turnover rate. I did need a bachelor's degree to get into this field because in order to get your certified alcohol and drug counseling license or certification, you have to have at least a bachelor's. And then to move up from that to be a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, you have to have your master's. Typically, when you get to like a program director, when I started off, I was just a counselor. I just did case management. It was really nice. And then I just moved up through the management tiers. Typically, you do need a master's when you become a program director, but because of the high turnover rate, you tend to get like a lot of people like myself who were just getting their master's and only have their bachelor's in this role. But typically, just a bachelor's is required for counseling, at least in this field.
Awesome. Thank you. And David?
For me, this is kind of a trick question. Getting the position I have currently wasn't too difficult, only because of my credentials, but getting to where I am, it took a long time. So I have over 30 years in corrections, and that was a huge plus for getting the position, plus the PhD, and plus the licensure. That's the piece that put me over the top as far as I understand from my competition.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. As for the next question, unless anybody else wants to reflect on someone else's experience. Okay, next question. And once again, it is a two-part. Why did you pick psychology as your major? And was it your first choice or did you have any doubts? Christina?
So this is actually sort of a funny roundabout story. So psychology was actually something I chose because I needed to get a 4-year degree. It was a requirement in my household. And at the time, I had so many different interests. I really had a hard time putting my finger on one thing in particular. But applying to schools and going through that application process, I had to do some digging and think, what did I take in high school that can be useful to life, to the workforce, and potentially go on to something later? And I thought back to my psychology elective. I enjoyed that course so much and saw that as an opportunity to potentially get into teaching with a bachelor's degree. So it wasn't my first choice because I was all over the place. I applied to a few places with fashion design and merchandising in mind. I also briefly looked into mortuary science, but psychology stuck with me from the very beginning. I did get a little bit sidetracked midway. I would say about the end of my sophomore year, I came across forensic pathology, which ultimately ended up being the thing that fascinated me the most. And very, very briefly switched to a pre-med track. But after finding how long that would take me, I worked my way back around and added a forensic studies minor, a certificate program, and did a study abroad while keeping my degree in psychology. So I ended up with a degree that helps me in daily life, a lot, and interested me to keep going, and then padded that with something that was my ultimate career goal. So my little roundabout way of ending up with a degree in psychology.
Thank you. Ruby?
Yeah, for me, it was very interesting. It goes back to high school. I was reading the questions and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm actually remembering the first time I decided to go for psychology. And it all happened in my junior year in high school. And one of the psychology teacher actually went into one of our, I believe it was English. She came in, just talking about her course and how fascinating it was. And I think I was like the only one that was just with my mouth open. I was fascinated with everything she was talking about, how the brain works and how psychology impacts you every day, and so she just kept going on. And I found love. That same day I signed up for her course, and so I took her class my senior year, and it was easy for me. I just knew I wanted to help people, so psychology was the best route for me, and that's how I started my psychology degree at Nevada State College. So it was my first choice. It led me to another path, which I'm going to talk about later on, but it's really interesting, but it was my first choice.
Thank you. Bree?
My story is very similar to Ruby's. I fell in love with psychology in high school. I just loved it. And my family always knew me as like the caretaker and the helper of the family. And when I told my parents in high school that I wanted to do psychology, they kind of shut it down. And they're like, you'll never do anything with that degree. And I believed, I don't know why I would. And so I went into nursing. When I went into Nevada State, when I started Nevada State, I was originally in nursing. And I thought, there's always a job. Nurses always are being hired. Like as a nurse, you'll never be out of work. And I realized how hard it is. And I realized how much dedication you have to give to it. And my heart wasn't there. And I kind of fought with my parents for a little bit. I told them, hey, I want to be a helper, and I want to be a mental health helper. Like, I know that's something that I can do. And I know that psychology is my stepping stone into the future of how I'm going to get there. And that's what I want to do. I want to help people. And I'm not dedicated enough to help them physically, but I am dedicated enough to help them mentally. And I knew after realizing how hard nursing is, I realized, maybe psychology is my thing. Maybe mental health is my thing.
Thank you. David?
I like to say psychology found me. I didn't find it. I think I was about 21 years old, and I was studying abroad in Northern Germany, young, money in my pocket, felt free for the first time in my life. I mean, it was like the best of the best. And then while we were on that trip, a student came up to me and said he was suicidal. And it floored me. I thought, how could we be in this situation, and how could somebody want to take their life? So we talked. I don't remember to this day what we talked about. And we went our ways that day. Not long after that, another student came up and said they wanted to kill themselves. And my mind was just blown away. So we spoke. I said whatever I said. We went our different ways. Towards the end of the trip, both students on different occasions came up to me and said, you saved my life. I just wanted to let you know that. That had huge implications for me. One, the gratification of helping people the feeling was amazing. But then the other side of it too was, what if I messed up? What if I said the wrong thing? And what if they had died? How would I have felt? And that's when I knew I wanted to learn the art, the trade, the practice of psychology. And I knew to do what I wanted to do, I had to go the PhD route. So that's how I got into psychology, and I haven't looked back since.
Thank you. That's an amazing story. I'm going to give space for if anybody else wants to speak or connect on anything.
I want to say, so Brianna, it's so interesting that you said that. You made me remember growing up, the same, my parents asked me for advice, actually. Everybody around me knows to come to me. So it was so natural for me also to be that caregiver, that person that wants to help everybody give advice. And so it kind of became so natural to me for me to choose psychology, similar to all of you. It just became, it was me already all along.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to add to Brianna, after I got back from Germany, I had to share this decision with my parents. And so I went golfing with my dad, and we were on about the second hole. And I said, Dad, I'm going to be a psychologist. He wouldn't talk to me for 3 holes. He didn't like psychologists at all.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think it also is, they're a product of their generation where mental health wasn't a thing back then. And, you know, we had a very close family member who had taken his life around the time I graduated high school. And I remember growing up and hearing things about this family member and them saying like, oh, he's always so sad, and like kind of putting down his mental health. And to me, I thought that was a very interesting take on it. And I think a lot of that that's why my parents weren't very as supportive as I wish they would have been on the mental health route, because I don't think their generation bred them to believe that mental health is as significant as it really is.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the third question. Was earning your degree difficult? And if so, what made it difficult? Some examples are, was it the long study hours, the memorization, etc.? Christina?
So my degree was difficult to get at times. It wasn't so much because the coursework was hard to understand or long study hours. I went into college straight from high school, so I was still kind of on that role of knowing how to study, take tests, write papers. What became difficult for me was focusing. I think like I mentioned, I was a little bit all over the place in college, not really knowing how to hone in on what I wanted to do exactly. And so that ended up being a little bit difficult for me. I don't know if it was anxiety or what it was, but I had a hard time going into places like the Career Center or the Department Resource Office and asking for help and guidance. I was very much independent, and I really, looking back, wish I hadn't have been, because I ended up taking courses that didn't count for much kind of along the way, exploring, and that pre-med track for one semester just absolutely destroyed my GPA because I was trying to toss in all these prerequisites. So just a couple of mistakes along the way. We all do that. But I would say that confusion and not taking advantage of some of those on-campus resources was really what did make it difficult for me. Once I got to the point though where I was past my general ed, past those prerequisites, had gotten back on track with my major and added a minor that I loved, that was what helped me move through. Seeing that I had more choices to gear my degree towards what I wanted to get out of it, that was what helped me stay excited and stay focused. But yeah, otherwise I wouldn't say too much difficulty as far as the courses themselves were concerned. They were all so fascinating once we got to those mid-level and then upper division courses.
Thank you. Ruby?
Yeah, thinking back of what were the most hardest or the hardest challenges that I faced, I think there were two. The first thing was, trying to explain to my parents. I'm a first generation college student. So trying to explain to them that it took time. Like I had classes till 9 p.m. They didn't understand that. They wouldn't believe me sometimes. So I had to explain like, look, there's courses late because that's just the way scheduling is. So it took them a year and a half to really understand that classes are late. It takes me a long time to study. There's a lot of time to put in, and I had a part-time job. The second challenge was when I was working 3 jobs, part-time jobs. It was difficult to handle. I think I was doing 15 credits. It was my last year, senior year, 15 credits each semester, and working 3 jobs. That was difficult. But what made me persevere really was just knowing that there was the stage was waiting for me, and it was, being a first generation student, I knew I was going to make my parents proud. I knew that I was basically starting a new chain reaction for my family, right, for generations to come. So yeah.
Thank you, Ruby. Bree?
Very similar. I had more of my struggles came from personal struggles. At 20, I got pregnant with twin boys. And I very soon after that became a single mother. And I remember people talking to me about it and saying like, oh, what are you going to do about school? And in my mind, I thought, I'm going to go to school. And so that was really difficult, trying to raise these little boys on my own and then do this degree within the allotted amount of time. And then I also worked on campus, and I wanted to be that student who did it all. And so I was that student who did it all. I joined Psych High, and I was the treasurer, and I got a part-time job on campus, and I loved being involved. And then I had to juggle that with my children. But I think what really, really got me through it was utilizing my resources and my services on campus, which was definitely the Nevada State resources and my friends and my confidants and my Psych High group, who, really, really got me through on those days where I was like, I can't do this. Like I cannot do all of it. It's impossible. And just their moral support was phenomenal. And thank God for them, because I met them on campus, and they were such a big part of my college experience that sometimes I look back at the pictures, and then I have like these cute messages that I had wrote them, like just paragraphs of how much I'm appreciative of them. And I think getting involved on campus really helped me to know those people, which really in the long term helped me finish my degree.
Thank you. That's wonderful. David?
I'm willing to bet I'm blocking a lot of this, but as I'm thinking back, there's a philosophy I just followed: one textbook at a time, one final at a time, one class at a time, and you just build and you keep going and you keep going. And before you know it, you look behind, you say, okay, I'm finished. So it's just, once you have a determination of where you want to go and what you want to do, you eventually end up there. I think the other folks bring up really, really good point, especially for people who do post-grad work. Life goes on. I hear people say, how could I get a master's degree? I don't want to give up my life. I can't do this. I can't. Life goes on. We still have relationships. We still can go to movies and restaurants. Life goes on. It doesn't stop just because you're in school.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. I'll pause to see if anybody else wants to reflect together. I'll go ahead and move on to question 4 then. Did you ever imagine yourself doing what you do now? Christina?
So my ultimate goal, I think I've alluded to, is not really related to the field of psychology. I wanted to work in a crime lab. And so I didn't really imagine myself doing what I do currently, but it fell into place very seamlessly. So gathering the experience that I did while I was in college, I worked on campus part-time as well, in the convenience store, and moved up quite a bit actually doing that, and then ended up doing their clerical work. So I gained experience doing things that were forward-facing with customer service. And then gaining the experience with psychology through the degree prepared me extremely well for exactly what I'm doing right now. I just took so many different avenues towards trying to attain my goal of working in that crime lab, that I wasn't quite expecting to be where I am. But I'm really grateful because I work for an amazing nonprofit organization that has an amazing reputation and does so much for all of the kids and families in this community. So I can kind of look at it as a lot of the stepping stones along the way. And I could never be angry for having the positions that I've held, because it's more life experience. It's more being able to help people indirectly. So everybody that's here has touched on the fact that that's part of what drew them to psychology, was the helping people. My thought initially was that I might end up helping people when a loved one has already passed. But here I am helping people who are dealing with difficult times with their mental health or the mental health of their child. And it feels good to be able to take those calls and see the patients who come in with their families and say, we love what you guys do so much. So I would just give the advice to this college students who are interested in getting into something, say, not quite on the level of a counselor or a licensed provider, but if you still want to have a taste of that field, just to gain experience within customer service. It seems menial, to be quite frank, But in reality, you're the first person that that family in need calls and speaks with, and you build a relationship with them, and that reflects on the services that are provided, and vice versa. So I guess don't look past things that might seem small, because you never know how much of an impact just your voice on the phone can mean for a family who's calling, whether they're in crisis or they feel like they've called 12 different providers, and they're just at their wits' end with their kids' behavior, or they're feeling like they might self-harm or anything. You never know what you might be to that person. So yeah, I think that's pretty much sums that up.
Thank you. Ruby, did you imagine yourself where you are today?
No. I was supposed to be a marriage therapist, actually. That was my goal. That was my dream. And then I met my husband. I'm kidding. I'm not blaming him. But I did meet him, and just, being here, I was supposed to go out of state for my master's degree, but I decided, look, I have friends here. I have everything I want here. I'm just, at the same time, I was hired as a student worker at Nevada State College. So doing my psychology degree, thinking, okay, I'm going to stay in this field. I'm going to be a therapist. If I can't be a marriage therapist or do school, to go out of state, I'm just going to figure it out here. But I was a student worker for 3 years during my bachelor's degree. And I experienced a lot of, I learned a lot from every department in administration. So financial aid, recruitment, admissions. And within those 3 years, I fell in love. I fell in love with higher ed. I fell in love with helping. I mean, it still was around that area of helping, right? So I wasn't doing necessarily therapy, but I was talking to students about their future and helping them find that and helping them, get into a degree, start their education. And so it was still my passion. And so as soon as I graduated, I was offered a position at Nevada State College to be a recruiter. And so for me, it was easy because I was already doing the work. I now had a title in the bachelor's degree. Some advice, an advice that I would give students is that not to be so set in stone, similar to what Christina said, don't be set in stone of, I have to be a licensed therapist, or I have to. You can get there, right? But there's going to be other opportunities, other doors. Let them come in, let them come to your life and try it out. You might end up like Christina and I, where you fall in love with the door that opened in front of you. And now higher ed will always be my passion because I'm still helping, and it's a field that we need more and more people to be role models for our students.
Thank you. Bree?
Initially when I was in nursing, I did not picture myself here, obviously. I wanted to join the Peace Corps, and I wanted to move to Boston, and I wanted to do all these lofty goals. But once I switched over to psychology, I knew I wanted to be in some sort of mental health field. And it struck me it struck me early on that I wanted to be in substance abuse counseling because I'm a huge substance abuse advocate. I will die on this hill. I will always be a huge advocate. Even after I finish my master's, I want to continue in this field, to continue doing this. As I've gone through the motions and I've worked in this field for 4.5 years now, as I've gone through this and I've taken additional courses in my new program, I've kind of rediscovered another love, which is working with geriatric patients. So that's a really cool goal that I'm now working on, is, working more with the geriatric community in Henderson. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of the question. I have it written down.
Did you imagine yourself doing this? And did you ever imagine yourself doing what you do now?
Yeah, I think early on in my college experience, I did decide to do substance abuse. So yeah, I did picture myself here. The piece of advice that I would give to students is expand what you know about the field. Like I thought there was only kind of like one route. And even within substance abuse, there's several different branches. There's working with court clients, there's working with pregnant patients, there's working with children. And, open your mind to all the different possibilities that are out there. Look into internships, talk to community providers, talk to just random people, because even in social work, psychology and social work is such a vast field, and you could really do anything in it. So don't try to, like Ruby was saying, don't try to be one track about it. There's so much you can do with it. And so kind of look into all those options.
Great. Thank you. Great advice. David?
You know, thinking back about being an undergrad student at the University of Utah, there's no way I would have thought I would have ended up in prison. Not a million years. Um, so when I was in graduate school, we had to do pre and postdoc internships. And in graduate school, you got to figure out how to put food on the table. So there was one internship that paid $300 a month. That, you know, that was good money back then. And it happened to be at some correctional center. I didn't even think about it. I just went for the money. And it took me about 2 months to realize I'm working in a prison. And then it took me about 6 months to figure out what this thing was. And then after about a year, I absolutely fell in love with it. And then I've just never been there since. And I think points have been made very, very, very clearly here. Opportunities are going to come to you. You don't know which ones they are. Doors are going to be available. Knock on the door, see what's there, and you'll be surprised to find out life and your job will find you. You don't necessarily have to look for it.
Thank you. Anybody else want to reflect? Okay, I'll move on to question number 5. What was the most important class you took or classes that were useful to you now in your current job?
So for me, I think I touched on the fact that because I'm not a provider of mental health services, I look at the degree as a whole as almost something that I use in everyday life. And I reflect on that quite a bit in speaking with people of all different backgrounds. Like an example is just I took a psychology of stress course, and I will still look back to some of the techniques described in that class for whether I'm losing sleep or just having a hard time. Another one is psychology of addiction, sexuality, or even abnormal psych. You encounter these things that are out there in the real world that a lot of people might not really have a good understanding of. So I like to think that those courses were the most important for me as an individual, because that prepared me to stop for a second and be less judgmental, to not lose my patience with someone who might be different or going through something difficult. So those are really some of the most important, in my opinion, and related to my line of work too. You have to have the ability to talk with people who may have a difficult experience to discuss with you, and they could be standoffish about it, or they might have difficulty putting their thoughts together too. And you just have to remember, this is what I'm doing. We have to slow down, talk with them calmly, and just work through until they can get through to you what they want to discuss. So I think that was as much as I really thought back on. And then too, things like self-observation and development, knowing how I am portraying myself to others and how I might be seen. There's so much to that major that you can just use in an everyday scenario. So I'd say it was all pretty important.
Thank you. Ruby?
Yeah, similar to Christina, it's so interesting how every course you learn so much, and in that moment you don't think how it's going to impact your life as a whole, right? 10 years later, I'm still using interesting facts about or information about developmental psychology with my daughter, right? Like I'll remember something like, oh, she's going through this stage, and I'll look back into my books. Every single class taught me a lot, and it stuck by me. It really did. And I encounter new experiences in my life now that bring me back to those moments, turning in a paper about a specific topic or an area of study. So similar to Christina, just every single psychology class, and outside of my psychology class, my communications course was very important part of my career now, because like I mentioned, I became a recruiter right after graduating, and I had to present to my first presentation actually. What I had no idea how many people were going to be there. I thought 15 students. It was 200 parents in an auditorium. I was shaking, and they're like, "Hey, you've done this." I was like, "Yeah, I've met 200 parents." So they kind of threw me out there. I did okay, right? But I learned, but I remember a lot of the strategies that came from my communication courses. And then my psychology, kicked in of like, what's going on with me? Oh, okay, I'm nervous because this is going on in my head. I have to switch it. I have to use this strategy to become more confident at this moment. And so it's so interesting how you mix all your courses to be successful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Bree?
I think one of my favorite classes I took was diagnosing and testing. Dr. Richard Yao taught it. He also taught my Psych 101 course. So he taught my very first class. And I think that was one of my last classes. And, having him there for me throughout my entire college career was just so impactful. It was really, really nice having him there. And then I also took a death and dying class, which I absolutely fell in love with. And oddly enough, I was like, learn to kind of accept death and dying. I was like, what an interesting thing you learn in college, to accept the fact that you're going to die someday. And it was like a really cool experience. And, we had so many different cultural aspects in that class, and just learning like the sociological background of death and dying is really fascinating, really cool. And it got me kind of into that mental health field too, like doing grief counseling, grief and trauma counseling. I thought was very interesting too. But I think the ones that really got me, are helping me now, like in my career, are child development, oddly enough, because I remember one of the pieces of advice I got from one of my supervisors is, if someone started using at a young age, treat them as if they're still that age. So if they started using when they're 16, treat them as if you were treating a 16-year-old person. And I think that child development class and those human lifespan classes really helped, because I was able to think back on those and say, okay, at 16, usually developmentally, this person is here. This is how I should treat them in my therapy, in my counseling sessions. And I thought that was really, really cool to accidentally fall back into it and be able to use that. Because, my supervisors have never said, think about child adolescence, think about those courses. But in a roundabout way, I ended up doing that, which I think has helped me in my field.
Thank you. David?
I find this question really interesting, and I agree with what everybody else has said. I want to say it just a little differently. For those people working on their bachelor's degree, treat every course as it's important, because what happens is, as you build your education knowledge, your academic knowledge, eventually you're going to get a piece of paper that says you got a degree. And that degree is going to serve as a foundation. And off that foundation, you're going to start building based on experiences that you're provided. You don't necessarily know what experiences are coming, so you don't know what content you need to look back on and dip into. So take every class seriously. Of course, some will be more interesting to you than others, but don't put one class down over the other, because you don't know what you're going to need in the future.
Thank you. That's very true. Anybody else want to reflect or discuss? I'll go ahead and move on to the final question. How difficult was it for you to find a job fresh out of college?
It was difficult for me to find a job straight out of college. I started applying for positions prior to graduation, as I believe most of us or many of us do. And I went to interviews, and at the time I was looking into a lot of positions that required a subject matter exam prior to being chosen for interview. So I ran into this issue where I would test well, I would meet all the qualifications, but I wouldn't be called for the interview. So it was incredibly discouraging. And I found out very early on that it is a lot of who you know. So I needed to have made some of those connections in college, with whether it was the career fair, going through an internship, or just kind of mingling and getting out there a little bit more, to be able to have that push when you know someone within that building that might be able to say, hey, my friend or my colleague or student or whatever you may be applied for this position. They did really well on their exam. They have all the qualifications. Give them a chance. So my advice to everyone is to really take advantage of those resources, because I didn't. And I really had to go above and beyond to try to get in somewhere, and you're finally given the opportunity eventually. Like I think we've all said, you don't know what you're going to come upon, so you can't be discouraged, but just getting those extra connections made, that phone number that you exchange somewhere and you happen to mention that you have an interest in a field, that I feel is just as important as your education and your work experience. They're all intermingling and help to build your resume and make it easier to get a job out of college. So yeah, I look back and I'm like, I wish I had somebody to really push me towards the importance of that. I was in complete denial. I thought that you get this degree, you have a variety of work experience, some volunteer work here and there, and you'll be golden. But yeah, you definitely need to do a bit more to really stand out. And so yeah, that's my advice. And something comes up eventually. You just have to be patient.
Thank you. Ruby?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier with my bachelor's degree, they had actually offered me the job as soon as I graduated. So it was because I was already working there as a student worker. They had a position open. They knew I already knew how to do presentations, knew all the information. So it was an easy process, right? So I was hired right after. I didn't have a break. But I loved it. It was a great opportunity. I really saw it as a stepping stone as a recruiter. I learned a lot. I learned how to present. I learned how to meet people. I learned how to develop, department plans, calling campaigns, you name it, everything that I needed to really shape that leader I wanted to be. I gained from that experience. The position I have now actually came 4 years later after I figured, it's time for me to grow into another field, not field, but I wanted to stay in higher ed, but into another position, right? And so it just happened that I was doing my master's degree, and I saw this position, the post-secondary manager position. I didn't really understand. Well, it wasn't the post-secondary manager position at that time. It changed after a few years, but it used to be the scholarship manager. I didn't really understand what it meant. I'm like, I've never developed scholarships. I mean, I've talked about them to students, but I went into the interview very confident, right? I knew I had the enthusiasm, I had the passion, I had the experience of working with students in higher education. So when I went in, I said, look, I don't, like when they asked me, do you know these programs? No, I don't, but I'm a fast learner, and I love taking on new challenges, I just really enjoy the challenge in general of creating a new role. So when I started this position, there was really nothing. They said, okay, you're hired. We don't have a program, so can you develop it? I wasn't ready for that big challenge, but I'm very proud of the position that's now the post-secondary manager position, because it started from nothing, and now we have a whole team, and it's been really gratifying. So an advice that I could give students is to just take risk. You may be comfortable in one position right after college, but start networking, talk to others, talk to friends, have a LinkedIn, make sure you talk to professors from your undergrad, or if you're thinking of going to graduate school, keep building connections, because it's those connections that really help you find that next step or enter grad school.
Thank you, Ruby. Bree?
Yeah, I think it was pretty easy for me to get into my position, or at least get a job, just because I got very lucky that something I'm passionate about has a high turnover rate. So I got lucky that there's always companies hiring for substance abuse counselors. There'll always be. So I kind of got lucky. However, I did utilize my resources. Dr. Yao specifically, I remember I was nearing graduation, I was in tears in his office, and I was thinking, I'll never get a job, I'll never get hired. And he didn't, I don't think he purposely laughed. It kind of chuckled and was like, don't worry, you're young, I'm gonna help you get a job. And I remember he reached out to Help of Southern Nevada, wonderful resource. And they weren't hiring at the time, but just having him there to encourage me and to reach out to other providers in the community kind of get a little word in for me was extremely, extremely helpful. And I think that's also what got me into graduate school, especially at such a nice college, was having those resources, because it was Dr. Yao and Dr. Naman who wrote my letters of recommendation for me. And getting to know my professors, like getting to know them and utilizing their office hours and, getting to utilize them really, really, really paid off in the long run. It got me this job that I'm in. It got me into a graduate program. So utilizing your professors is the best advice I can give. And being okay with getting a lot of no's for a little bit. My fiance graduated with his master's in business, and he just kept getting no after no after, and it was kind of debilitating for him. And it's hard to get a master's in a pandemic and then get hired. It's almost impossible. So just being okay with getting told no for a little bit it's gonna come. And like we've said, like we were all saying earlier, sometimes your dream job doesn't become your dream until after you've gotten the job. So it'd be okay with getting no, because eventually something will come around, you'll find your passion eventually.
Thank you for sharing that. David?
I was lucky. I went straight into graduate school, so I didn't have to have that headache. But if I were to give somebody advice about a headache, when you approach the graduate school process, and I think folks have this experience, you really want to do your research. You want to know how many students are going to be accepted into that particular program. What's your competition? What are the requirements? Do they look for the GREs? What are you putting yourself up against? Are you competitive? I think that was one of my failings, is I was a little too cocky, and like we just heard, you get told no an awful lot. You just need to hear yes once and you're good to go.
Definitely true. Thank you for sharing that. Those were the 6 questions. I just want you guys to be aware, we do still have about another 10 minutes. I guess, is there anything last minute you would want to share or say to either a freshman or a senior student about, I know a couple of you guys have said use your resources, such as your professors, the Career Center, any other advice you would want to share with them, whether they're graduating and continuing their education, or they're graduating and looking for employment?
There's something I think I'd like to add, and it's something we're kind of struggling right now with in the Department of Corrections. For those of you graduating, ask yourself, what do you really want to do, and is it going to require a license? Licensure really, really opens up the door to a practice. And what is that practice? It kind of decides what you want to do with your career. We have both licensed and unlicensed people that work in the department. Just ask yourself if you really want to do patient care face-to-face, where you're really making a difference. If you're testing, diagnosing, those things are going to require a license.
That's great advice. Thank you.
I would, that's it exactly. I was writing that down to touch on that same thing, that, get to know your program requirements, because I remember talking to a few of my professors and saying, this is what I want to do. And they're like, okay, well, this is what you need to do. Like, okay, you can practice mental health with a master's in clinical mental health, but that's it. But if you get a master's in social work, you can do A, B, C, D, and E. And if you get this degree, you can do these 5 things. And I was like, okay, so, and then after that, like, okay, now that I have my master's in social work, now you have to get licensed. And then after that, then you get a clinical license. And there's so many different aspects of degrees and licensure that you have to, one, know what you're able to do with what degrees, and know the program requirements. I know that something that also got me interested in social work was not having to do a GRE exam, which very selfishly, I was like, oh, well, I'll do that. If I can avoid one test, I will do that for sure, compared to getting into a different type of master's, which does require a GRE. So getting to know what your program requirements are, and then what you're able to do with what you have afterwards.
Great, thank you.
So one piece of advice I would give students is to utilize the resources on your campus. I was thinking back to my senior year in college. The Career Center had just started, and it was a room in the LAS. And I was just talking to my best friend who was actually at Nevada State College as well at the same time as I was. And I was asking her, I was like, "Do we have a career center?" And she's like, "Yeah, there was a room. They had barely started. It was amazing, but there was like one student worker. They were really trying." And I never utilized, I never utilized that resource. I didn't really go out and really explore different fields or started looking for internships. I didn't look for internships. I was already a student worker. And yes, I loved being a student worker. And I made connections, and I went to network mixers, which is another thing, go to networking events. But I did not utilize the resources. And now that the Career Center is so robust and so amazing and offers so much to its students, it is a perfect time to really go in and look for internships, explore what type, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to grad school? Do you need to take the GRE? Do you need a license for what you want to do? What does that work look like? What does that role look like? Are you still fascinated in it? If you're not, then explore other options, because if you would have told me that I was going to be a recruiter and then be a manager for a department that I had to develop, I would have probably laughed, because I said I'm going to be a marriage therapist. And I'm still happy. It's my passion. Like Brianna mentioned, you find your dream after sometimes you get that new job, because you still find that passion as long as you're helping people. But internships are very beneficial. So I recommend that you go to network mixers, meet people, open up, and make those connections, but also go into different internship opportunities.
Thank you, Ruby. Christina?
I don't have too much to add. I was going to touch briefly on the topic of internships, and in my own personal experience, by the time I was scrambling to kind of help my way into getting a job, because I panicked after not finding anything right away, I started to look into internships and found that it was actually more difficult to find something as a graduate with an undergrad degree versus what my opportunities would have been had I looked into that while I was actively studying. So that was a little bit of a shock to me. And like I said, I lacked the guidance or the knowledge or whatever it was to know where to look for those resources and find out those things. So looking back, I definitely, like we've said the whole time, just take advantage of those resources that are available, because at some point, those are not going to be available to you anymore. And you've kind of passed the point where you have all of those things at your fingertips. So I say the sooner you start looking into those kinds of things, the better.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and push stop. Let me fit this here.